Every day that I felt like laying on the floor and dropping out, I would always think, well, I'm not doing this just for me. This is for the next person because nobody should have to go through this. And so if I get through this, that means the next person will be able to get through it and not have to deal with these hurdles.
Hello and welcome to Art Restart, where we explore how artists are reinventing their fields and building a new landscape for the arts. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, a production of the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with singer and songwriter Precious Perez.
Se despierta tarde, no llora mala para empezar. Hace lo que siente. Busca lo que quiere y aunque esta noche no tiene un plan, sabe que algo viene.
That's Precious you're hearing in her new single Sin Preguntar, which won Best Latin Song just last month at the Latin Music Awards Kentucky. Precious is also an educator and disability activist who's recently been performing and recording under the moniker Reggaetonera Ciega, the Blind Reggaeton Singer. Forgive my pronunciation. She is president of RAMPed, Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities, whose mission is, quote, to amplify disability culture, promote equitable inclusion, and advocate for accessibility in the music industry. Founded just 2 years ago by recording artists Lachi and Gaelynn Lea, RAMPed has already succeeded in making the last 2 Grammy Awards more accessible than ever to participants, audience members, and viewers alike. Precious spoke to me from her home in Louisville, Kentucky. I started by asking her to describe the beginning of the musical journey that eventually brought her to a conservatory training at Berklee College of Music in Boston.
So my journey started when I was very young, probably around the age of 5. I remember at my 5th birthday party, I was gifted 2 CDs, very different artists, J-Lo and Eminem. And my mom put them on in the car for me. And after that, I think when I was 6 years old, a family friend gifted me a pink Barbie karaoke machine. And I would love to find that to this day and get one and replicate that experience because I think it'd be really wholesome. But
you could imagine, given the movie, how expensive how in demand they are now.
I can only imagine. But I would love to get my hands on one of those. From there, it had a little cassette recorder built in. And so I would listen to the radio in my room and I would have a cassette in and be recording myself singing to the radio. And I think at that point is when I really knew, hey, I like singing. I could be a singer. I think I want to be a singer. And that kind of developed as I got older. I was in music classes in elementary school. I was in the Boston Children's Chorus for a while. And then in high school, I was in the Handel and Haydn Society. As a scholarship recipient, I was part of the vocal arts program, which gave me 4 years of private lessons through New England Conservatory and also 4 years in a Handel and Haydn ensemble.
Oh, so you were really classically trained.
Yes. So I did, that was my formal training throughout high school was through them. And so, but it was a really important foundation for me because I learned how to breathe properly and really how to utilize my instrument in a way that I could transfer the basic techniques to other styles, which is what I was able to do with my voice teacher in college.
Had Berklee educated other blind students before?
So Berklee has an assistive technology lab at Berklee designed specifically for blind students. So there were a lot of us. There's still, the more of us leave, a bunch of us come in. So that was an amazing resource, an incredible group of people I was able to lean on. I will say that depending on the major, across the college, accommodations aren't succinct. And it really depends on what you're doing and your ability to advocate. Because for me, I was the first blind student at Berklee to do the music ed major program. And so I encountered a lot of questions about, well, how are you going to do this thing? How are you going to adapt a classroom? How are you going to do this activity? And it was, my answer for the first little while was, we're going to have to figure it out together because I don't know. And you're the professor. So you teach me what you know. And then I tell you what I would need to make that work. And so my professors were incredible. I got really lucky with my professors. We were able to really work through a lot of that. You know, it was a long road, of course, a lot of uphill battles, a lot of things behind the scenes. But overall, I was able to complete my degree. So I'm happy about that.
What came easiest for you and what was the biggest challenge?
I always say the biggest challenge in anything is other people's misconceptions.
Oh.
Because for
which
me...
were what? Yes.
I always get that reaction. That's so funny. For me, I now am at a point in my life where I know exactly what I'm capable of. I'm confident in myself and I'm not afraid to ask for help when I need it. And I'm just very comfortable in my own skin. And so the challenges that I face tend to be when somebody else decides that I'm not able to do something or thinks that I can't accomplish something because of my blindness. And so that's when I usually encounter challenges. And, you know, throughout my academic career, it was, well, you know, this is a lot of work, right? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, do you have somebody that can help you? This was my very first meeting with the chair of the department before I even applied for the major. This was just getting a feel for things. I walked in there and that was the question I got asked. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, do you have somebody that could help you? And I said, no. Like, and in my head, you know, I'm a very sassy human. And so in my head, I was thinking, sir, you don't know who you're talking to. Because my entire life, I've been taught to advocate for myself, and I haven't let anybody else decide for me what I could do and what I couldn't do and what I was allowed to do because of my disability. And so...
Which is pretty remarkable. I mean, that's remarkable for any young person, let's say at the age of 17 or 18 when you're getting into school, whether they have a disability or not. So where did that knowledge of self come from?
I think it came from, you know, my mom, ever since I was young, always said, you know, you're going to grow up like everybody else. And she knew how important my independence was and how important it was to teach me how to go through life and be able to keep up and be able to compete with my peers. And so the combination of that support and all of the support from all the teachers I had and everyone who believed in me really, I think, cultivated that confidence and my advocacy skill set. And so once I got to this point, I kind of expected this to happen. I was like, well, here we go again. And so my solution has always been, watch me. You don't think I can do it? Here we go. I'm going to show you that I can, and I'm going to show you that I can do it 10 times better than you ever imagined. And so from there, it just ended up being trial after trial. Okay, we're going to overcome this. This is how we're going to do it. And it was successful 9 times out of 10.
And now, of course, it means that the next blind music education student they have, it'll be successful 10 out of 10 because of the systems you put in place, right?
I would hope so, yes. That was the plan. You know, every day that I felt like laying on the floor and dropping out, I would always think, well, I'm not doing this just for me. This is for the next person because nobody should have to go through this. And so if I get through this, that means the next person will be able to get through it and not have to deal with these hurdles. And so that really motivated me to keep going. You know, I was a first generation college student. I'm a blind Puerto Rican woman, low income with anxiety and depression, all these different intersections. And so when I would think about giving up, it was my communities and my family that motivated me to really keep going, because if I was successful, then my community could be successful too.
So when you were studying on the music performance aspect of education, did you already have a sense of the type of music you were going to want to sing professionally?
I think for me, it started very vague because I knew I wanted to be versatile. I knew that I was trained classically, but I wanted to do contemporary pop, R&B, Latin, all of the above, all across the board. And so, as I wrote my own songs, I released my first album during my first year at Berklee.
Wow.
And
Because you had plenty of spare time, I guess.
well, I had help with that too. My high school music teacher pulled me aside one day during my senior year and said, I really think you have a gift. Like, I want to help you make an album. I have a friend who's a producer. And so he helped me create a Kickstarter campaign, and the producer, Doug Batchelder, he produced everything, brought in the session musicians, did all of that. And, we were lucky enough to raise the money in time. And I was able to release my first album in November of 2016. And so, from there, I kind of figured out my sound. I kept writing and I kept, releasing things here and there. And I think that was my journey documented through whether it was covers or performances or different acoustic releases that I had produced myself or worked with the same producer from my first album to release. That was my growth. I was able to grow through my experiences. When I studied abroad in Valencia, in Spain, that really shaped, I think, my direction a little bit more. And recently, I've just entered my new era, which I think is where I've always wanted to be, which is in front and center in the Latin space.
Well, speaking of front and center, I mean, recently, not only are you placing the Latin aspect of yourself front and center, but unlike many of your blind musician predecessors, you are also placing your disability front and center. You're not hiding it in any way. I'm thinking for yourself, you call yourself La Reggaetonera Ciega.
Yeah, okay,
right?
Look at the pronunciation.
Yes. And also another thing is you do not hide your eyes behind sunglasses, which a lot of blind musicians in the past have done. So I'm curious if you can talk about how you made sure that your full identity was part of your performance persona.
Absolutely. For me, I'm not a person that can separate myself from my art or from my work. And so my art has always been a representation of who I am and where I am at that point. And so for me, to do what I love, I have to be myself while I do it, or it doesn't feel real or authentic. And my disability is a huge part of who I am and where I am and why I am where I am. And so it's so important for me to really put disability culture at the forefront. And, that's evident through my involvement as now president of Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities. And that is a platform connecting the music industry to a global network of disabled music professionals. Ramped is a hub where anyone in the industry can hire disabled talent if you're looking for a manager or a producer or a songwriter. There's no excuse anymore as to where we are because now there is a place to find us. And Ramped also does consulting. We've partnered with the Grammys on accessibility, the Folk Alliance. We've had a couple different press features in Billboard and Grammy.com and all of these different things, really amplifying disability culture and advocating for accessibility within the music industry and promoting inclusion. And so I think my passion has grown stronger since being involved with Ramped. I got involved before Ramped launched officially. I was in the first class of professional members, and Ramped was founded by recording artist Lachi, who is very disability forward. And, she really gave me that push that I needed to really believe in myself to the point of, well, I can do this and I can do this as myself. And I feel like putting my disability at the forefront not only raises awareness, but it also allows people to understand that disability is also a diversity, but disability is something to celebrate, not something that signifies brokenness. And so I'm really passionate about being authentically me, and part of that is my blindness.
How old were you when you wrote your first song?
Oh man, my first good song was when I was like 13 or 14 in eighth
And
grade.
how did you
My
know it was good? Like,
well, you
as
see,
opposed to the bad ones before, what made that one good?
so my very first song, I have to start with the bad ones because that was like the first time I ever wrote anything. So I
Sure.
was probably 9 years old when I wrote my first song, and it was a poem about my childhood friend Julian when he was a baby. He was a baby back then, and I was 9, and I wrote a song for him. Well, it was a poem. It started as a poem, and then I brought it to my music teacher and I said, I want to turn this into a song. Can we do that? And so she really helped me create the melody and the piano part. And a friend and I got to perform it at our school assembly. And
Okay, so you
so
learned the basics of building a song
I
there.
learned the basics
Hmm.
then, yes. And then I wrote another one, like, I think it was a couple months later. I remember being around 10. And that one was lost inside my mind. And it was very simple and it was very repetitive and it wasn't that great. It wasn't that great, but at the time I thought like, wow, this is the best. I wrote a song and it's so good and I did it by myself. And so, you know, but I think when I was 13 and I woke up at 1 in the morning with this idea in my head about the first song that I always refer to is it's called Different and it's off my first album. And it really touches on, do you feel differently because you're different and how that feels when you are in a situation where you're looked at as other. But, exploring that feeling, but also the hope that, and, the realization that it's okay to be different because that's what makes us all unique. And, you're not alone if you do feel that way and you're allowed to shine and no one has the right to judge because we're all undefined. And so it's just that kind of exploration and acknowledgement of those feelings, but also celebration of differences.
Wow, at 13, that's pretty profound thing to write.
Thanks.
Do you write, because some of your recent songs are written in Spanish and sung in Spanish, do you write with equal ease in both Spanish and English?
I can write in both languages, but I feel like it helps me to have someone that has a little more because I'm fluent in both, but I'm also bilingual and I speak a lot more in English. So I think sometimes the translation, like I have to really cross reference and have someone look at it just to make sure, like, hey, this sounds okay. This makes sense because there may be a word that I use in English that I don't necessarily know the word in Spanish because I never had to use that word before in Spanish. And so I think it helps to have somebody else to look it over if I do write something in Spanish. But I have written a couple tunes on my own. The first song of the new era that was Sin Preguntar, that was written by the songwriter Raquel, and she is fantastic. And that was basically like, all right, what is your vision? What do you want to talk about? And then she wrote it, and I was like, absolutely 100% perfect. So, and then Melanin Queen was me. That was half English and half Spanish, and it was an idea I'd been working on for a while, and I'm so happy that it's out in the world now. The next one that's coming out is also written by Raquel, but they're all based around kind of like, what did I want to see as far as like, what is my vision and what do I represent as an artist and what direction do I want to go in? And so it's very collaborative. I always think collaboration, I used to be like, I want to do everything myself. I want to write, I want to play, I want to do all the things like Ed Sheeran. I want to like have my loop station and do all of this by myself. But I've come to realize that it's so much more fun and meaningful when I can collaborate with other people to create. And it really enhances the experience, but also the projects. And it's so much fun.
What have you, because you've probably met with so many industry executives and professionals, as well as musical artists with all kinds of disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about if you yourself have learned a couple, striking things you might not have known before this experience.
I think for me, I've just learned and continued to recognize that there's a gap. There's gaps in the industry and there's a lot more barriers than I realized that aren't just my own barriers as a blind person. But there are deaf artists who also face barriers and have different accommodations. People with neurodivergence, people with chronic illnesses. There are different accommodations and all over the gamut that aren't just related to what I'm used to advocating for. And so really understanding all of the different needs and access needs across the board has really been something that I've learned and I've been able to really incorporate into when I advocate for access needs in this capacity. And so it's really opened my mind and my heart to all the different lived experiences of people with disabilities and specifically music professionals with disabilities so that I can better advocate for all of us in the leadership capacity that I am fortunate enough to be in.
Other than going to ramp.org to find and hire musical professionals with disabilities, are there other kind of simple ways in which, or kind of no-brainer ways in which the recording industry could do better to accommodate and encourage blind musicians?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of just really low-hanging fruit that the industry could incorporate in social media marketing and posts using camel case hashtags, which is capitalizing the first letter of every word so that screen readers don't read it as a jumbled mess. Image descriptions, making sure that whatever pictures are posted have an ID : this picture shows XYZ, woman standing smiling with a trophy, or whatever details might be on a flyer that's posted just in the caption so that those of us who can't see the image know what the image is. There's also alt text where that can go as well, which is it's called alternative text, and image descriptions can also be put in that box. There's various ways to do it on different social medias, but it's best practice to put it in the caption because then it's fully visible and fully accessible. Audio description at events or for different shows and things. Self-description. Now that's one that's really simple that anyone can do when you're on a panel or when you're at an award show. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and today I'm wearing blah, 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 or anything that really, for example, I would say like, I'm Precious Perez. I am a blind Latina woman with box braids. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It shouldn't be this really long, long-winded description, but just something that gives us insight into, your outfit or, what matters to you and a little bit of personality. And it's very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be more than 10 words, but it's something that can really help engage blind musicians or audience members. Those are specifically for blind musicians, but then we think of ASL interpreting front and center, making sure that there's captions available, and also having ramps implemented on stages and making sure they are accessible as far as venues go. There's a lot of small things that can be done to ensure that accessibility is universally integrated and not an afterthought.
What about in your experiences recording in the recording studio and filming a video? What's most helpful in those settings?
So I was able to really, in every recording studio I've been in and in every kind of situation, I've been able to really say, I need a little more description on this. And, everyone pretty much knew to describe okay, we're going to the right, turn to your right, and this is where the booth is, or I'm going to put this behind you, and this is, the microphone is right in front of you, and if you reach backward, you'll feel where you can put your headphones. So just being very open. My solution is to just be open. I am very open about my disability. I'm very open about who I am and what I need. And so I always tell people, just ask. Ask if you don't know, because I will have no issue telling you if I need more information or if I need you to do something differently.
So you don't get answer fatigue?
No, not in those situations. I think that comes more with the general public.
Oh, I see.
I can get overwhelmed as anyone, I'm sure, with a disability, like, we're human. So there's going to be days where we just want to do the thing we're trying to do and don't want to deal with people being like, this way, that way, put their hands on you and do all this and answering questions. And I do my best to try and be as patient and as open as I can because I know that most of that comes from ignorance. The way that it happens is not necessarily by choice or of somebody's fault. They just never been exposed to people with disabilities, or they just don't genuinely have no idea. But there has to be a balance, right? Because we can't be on all the time. And so I try to, whenever I start feeling myself getting overwhelmed, I'll just kind of find some way to decompress, and really listening to my own body and my own mind and what I need really helps me to kind of balance all of that. Because it can be exhausting, and it is a lot, especially as a disabled artist that is doing everything on my own for myself. And so I kind of deal with that sometimes where I'm like, man, I really just don't want to do this today. But then I just take a deep breath and I remember that this is what I've always wanted. And so we're going to get up and we're going to do it. And then I'll sleep for 10 hours afterwards and it'll be great.
If you'd like to learn more about Precious and read a longer version of this interview, just head to uncsa.edu/artrestart. And in our show notes, I've also included a link to the American Foundation for the Blind's social media accessibility guidelines, if you need a refresher after what Precious has taught us. And if you yourself know a change-making artist in your part of the country you think would make a great Art Restart guest, please let me know. You can find me on Instagram at PCTalenti. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts, thanks for listening.